the agonizing truth behind your deepest suffering. The call is coming from inside the house. You are the unseen antagonist of your own life story. Discover why the terrifying starving beast locked in your mind's basement actually holds the brilliant, unrefined gold of your true power. Have you ever shot awake at 3 a.m., drenched in a cold sweat, choking on a thought so vile, so ruthlessly cruel or profoundly selfish that it made your own blood run cold? A fleeting fantasy of vengeance, a sudden spasm of dark envy, or a primal urge so deeply destructive that you squeezed your eyes shut, praying the person sleeping beside you couldn't sense the monster pacing inside your skull. You frantically shove the impulse back down into the abyss. You lock the cage. You smile the next morning as if nothing happened. But the undeniable creeping terror remains. You know exactly what lives in your dark. Channel name warmly welcomes you to this journey into the unseen. If you find the courage to walk with us through the hidden, terrifying corridors of the human mind today, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Your subscription is the vital spark that motivates us to continue creating deep, thought-provoking videos like this in the future. For years, I was a master architect of a beautiful, exhausting lie. I built a monument to the good person, a flawless, perpetually smiling statue that I dragged through life until my spiritual bones were ground to dust. I existed in a state of invisible, suffocating exhaustion. I offered polite forgiveness when every raw fiber of my soul screamed for a fierce boundary. I drowned my festering emotional wounds in the thick, suffocating syrup of toxic positivity. I chanted relentless mantras of light, desperately trying to convince myself that if I just stared at the sun long enough, the shadow stretching behind me would simply cease to exist. But darkness never evaporates. It only grows heavier, feeding on your denial. The agonizing weight of maintaining that immaculate facade became an iron corset around my lungs, slowly starving me of oxygen. I eventually looked in the mirror and felt a profound, crushing self-disgust, not because I was inherently evil, but because I realized I was fundamentally counterfeit. I was a fractured, hollow ghost, absolutely terrified to admit I was not whole. The pioneering psychologist Carl Jung left us with a chilling revelation. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will silently dictate every step of your life, and you will helplessly call it fate. He gave a name to this terrifying reality, the shadow. We are all dragging a heavy, invisible sack behind us, a psychological landfill stuffed with every piece of ourselves we deemed too ugly, too loud, or too dangerous for the world to accept. We are intimately united by our concealments. We navigate this world as a society of terrified actors, gripping our carefully curated scripts with white knuckles, paralyzed by the fear that someone might glimpse the chaotic, unscripted wilderness of our true nature. Tonight, I am not here to hand you another hollow sermon on how to be a brighter, more positive person. I am extending a much more dangerous yet infinitely more liberating invitation. I am asking you to pick up a flashlight. We are going to stop staring up at the blinding artificial lights of societal perfection. Instead, we are going to turn around and walk down the damp, creaking stairs into the basement of your psyche. We are going to unlock the heavy iron door you have spent your entire life desperately leaning against. We are going down into the dark together to finally meet the exiled fragments of your soul. As our eyes adjust to the gloom of this psychological basement, we must first understand how these vital fragments of our identity were ruthlessly banished to the dark in the first place. None of us arrived in this world carrying a shadow, burdened by shame or terrified of our own nature. We were born as sprawling, untamed landscapes of human expression, crying out in fierce rage when we were hungry, laughing wildly without restraint, and taking up space without a single shred of apology or self-awareness. We were brilliantly, unapologetically whole, but the quiet tragedy of the human condition is that, to survive our formative years, we must adapt to the terrifying vulnerability of needing love and protection from flawed caretakers and a rigid society. The emotional pruning begins incredibly early, and it is entirely brutal in its efficiency. A father clicks his tongue at a little boy's tears, and the child instantly learns that sadness is a fatal, repulsive weakness. Amputating his own vulnerability and dropping it into the dark sack behind him. A mother scolds a little girl for being too loud, too demanding, or too angry, and she quickly buries her innate assertiveness, replacing it with a compliant, agreeable smile that tastes like ash in her mouth. We quickly learn the devastating, unspoken mathematics of conditional love, express this specific trait, and receive warmth, safety, and inclusion, express that unacceptable trait, and face the freezing existential terror of abandonment. So we willingly carve ourselves up to survive. We meticulously construct a glittering, socially acceptable armor called the persona, a carefully curated performance of obedience, politeness, and palatable charm. Meanwhile, we throw everything else into the abyss. We exile our wildness, our burgeoning sexual desires, our fiery aggression, our selfish hungers, and even our most untamed eccentric creativity, because they threaten our safety in the tribe. I remember the exact sickening moment in my own life when I realized my chronic compliance was merely a trauma response. I was sitting in a crowded room, smiling and nodding along to an opinion I violently disagreed with, feeling my true, authentic self suffocating beneath the desperate, pathetic need to be liked by people I did not even respect. We become absolute masterpieces of psychological fragmentation, trading our profound, messy wholeness for the cheap, hollow currency of societal approval. We desperately try to forget the parts of ourselves we cut away, convincing ourselves that the mask is our true face, but the severed limbs of our psyche do not simply wither and die in the dark. They are alive, they are breathing, and they fester in the subterranean depths of our mind, silently gathering strength and waiting patiently for the day they will inevitably demand to be felt. Yet no matter how tightly we draw the strings on that heavy sack of banished traits, the repressed energy inevitably mutates and bleeds out into the pristine fabric of our daily lives. The shadow is not a passive, silent prisoner locked away in a cell. It is a restless, starving beast that demands to be acknowledged, and if you do not feed it consciously, it will violently hijack your life to feed itself. Have you ever noticed the irrational, explosive rage that blinds you when someone cuts you off in traffic, a sudden fury so disproportionate to the event that it leaves your hands physically shaking on the steering wheel? Or perhaps the venomous, biting judgment you feel toward a coworker who is shamelessly arrogant, a visceral hatred that borders on an unhealthy obsession. This is the insidious, terrifying magic of psychological projection. Carl Jung urgently warned us that whatever is rejected from the self appears in the outside world as an event. When we cannot tolerate the arrogance, the selfishness, the greed, or the incompetence within our own hearts, our psyche defends itself by unconsciously projecting those exact traits onto the people around us. They unknowingly become the mirrored projection screens upon which our internal disowned monsters are vividly cast. I spent years of my life utterly convinced that the world was heavily populated by toxic, manipulative people who were constantly crossing my boundaries, playing the role of the perpetual innocent victim. I was entirely willfully blind to the horrifying truth that my own shadow, my deep, unacknowledged cowardice, my manipulative, passive aggression, and my absolute refusal to stand up for myself was actively inviting them into my life to play out my internal drama. Our shadow operates from behind the curtain, silently sabotaging our relationships, detonating our hard-earned careers, and driving us into the numbing, destructive embrace of addictions and mindless distractions. It is the sudden, razor-sharp remark that inexplicably slips from your lips to deeply wound someone you love, the confusing urge to destroy a perfectly peaceful moment with unnecessary drama, or the chronic, paralyzing procrastination that ruins the dreams you loudly claim to want so badly. We walk around indignantly, pointing our fingers at the cruelty and hypocrisy of the world, blissfully unaware that the call is coming from inside the house. The agonizing realization that you are the unseen antagonist in your own life story, the author of your own recurring nightmares, is a profoundly bitter pill to swallow. But recognizing the leak in your own seams is the only medicine that can ever cure the blinding sickness of projection. Realizing that you are the unseen architect of your own suffering is a devastating blow to the ego, but it is precisely this shattering realization that initiates the true gritty and profoundly solitary work of healing. Descending into the shadow is not a theoretical, intellectual exercise to be comfortably completed in a weekend wellness retreat. It is an agonizing, terrifying baptism by fire that will strip you of every comforting illusion you hold about yourself. It requires a caliber of radical, unflinching honesty that most people will spend their entire lives successfully avoiding. To engage in genuine shadow work is to sit alone in the heavy silence of your room, strip away every noble justification, and stare unblinkingly at your own inherent capacity for malice, for betrayal, for profound jealousy, and for ruthless selfishness. It is emphatically not about becoming a monster, nor is it about acting out your darkest impulses. Rather, it is about standing face to face with the monster in the mirror and acknowledging with trembling lips and a breaking heart, "You are a part of me too." Thus, when the sharp, sickening pang of vicious envy strikes you because a close friend succeeded exactly where you failed, your conditioned instinct is to violently shame yourself, to repress the ugly feeling, and to paste on a rigid, congratulatory smile. The shadow worker must do the exact opposite. You must force yourself to pause, breathe heavily into the suffocating, anxious tightness in your chest, and actually invite the jealousy to speak. You must ask the ugliness where it comes from. You listen intently to its terrified, infantile cries about not being enough, about being left behind, about being inherently unlovable. You must hold space for your own darkness without immediately acting upon it, and crucially, without rushing to sanitize or fix it. I distinctly remember the visceral, physical nausea of writing down my darkest resentments on a blank piece of paper, my hand visibly shaking as I confessed onto the page the deeply held, petty grudges I had loudly pretended to have forgiven years ago. I wept uncontrollably on my bedroom floor, not from sadness but from the excruciating, overwhelming relief of finally telling myself the truth. Shadow work is a slow, methodical unshaming of the fragmented self. You must willingly wade waist-deep through the murky swamp of your own repressed guilt, purposely calling forward the memories that make you physically cringe, and offering yourself the one vital thing the world denied you when you first buried those traits: radical, unconditional grace. When you finally stop running from these terrifying internal apparitions and bravely pull a chair out for them at the table of your psyche, a profound and entirely unexpected alchemy begins to fundamentally alter your reality. The ultimate overarching goal of this harrowing journey into the dark is never to destroy the shadow, conquer it, or banish it once again, but to carefully integrate it into your conscious identity. This is because within that dense, terrifying darkness lies the most brilliant, unrefined gold of your entire being, The traits we locked away in our youth were not just our flaws and our sins, they contained the very core of our raw life force. Within your heavily repressed anger lies the fierce, unyielding boundary that will finally protect you from chronic abuse and mistreatment. Within your hidden, shamed selfishness lies the radical, necessary self-care required to stop endlessly pouring your energy from a perpetually empty cup. Within your darkest, most socially inappropriate thoughts lies the chaotic, vibrant, and entirely unique wellspring of your true creative genius. As I slowly and painfully began to reclaim my own exiled fragments, the suffocating, crushing exhaustion of maintaining the flawless, good person facade simply dissolved, replaced by a grounded, unshakable physical solidity in my own body. I was no longer a fragile, hollow glass statue, constantly terrified of being shattered by a stray negative emotion or a critical comment from a stranger. I realized I was a living, breathing, profoundly flawed human being, rooted deeply and securely in the messy reality of the earth. When you integrate your shadow, you begin to walk through the world with a quiet, undeniable, magnetic power because you no longer fear being exposed by anyone. There is absolutely nothing anyone can ever use against you because you have already looked at the absolute ugliest, most terrifying parts of yourself and fiercely love them anyway. The exhausting, invisible war that has raged inside your mind for decades finally ends, replaced by the profound quiet and enduring peace of true psychological wholeness. We must awaken to the reality that to be whole is infinitely more beautiful, more powerful, and more authentic than merely striving to be good. By courageously embracing the entirety of our human experience, the blinding light and the pitch-black dark, the benevolent saint and the destructive sinner, we finally step out of the suffocating shadows of our own making and into the brilliant, terrifying, and magnificent truth of who we really are. The journey through our psychological depths reveals a profound truth. We are the unconscious architects of our own suffering, having traded our magnificent, messy wholeness for the hollow safety of societal approval. From a young age, we ruthlessly amputated the wild, angry, and vulnerable parts of our identity, shoving them into the dark to secure conditional love and belonging. Yet these repressed fragments do not die. They mutate, leaking out into our daily lives through explosive reactions, irrational judgments, and the destructive theater of projection where we cast our own disowned inner monsters onto the people around us. Escaping this exhausting cycle requires an agonizing but absolutely necessary descent into radical honesty. We must strip away our noble justifications to face the darkest corners of our psyche. Shadow work is not about acting on malicious impulses, but about extending radical grace to the exiled parts of ourselves we once deemed unlovable. By courageously inviting our suppressed anger, selfishness, and envy back to the table, we discover that within this terrifying darkness lies our greatest unrefined gold, our boundaries, our capacity for self-care, and our raw creative power. Ultimately, the goal is never to destroy the shadow, but to safely integrate it. When we abandon the exhausting performance of striving to be good and embrace the fierce reality of being entirely whole, we unlock a grounded, unshakable authenticity. We become immune to the paralyzing fear of exposure, stepping fully into the brilliant truth of our humanity and securing enduring psychological peace. Profound lesson, true freedom, and unshakable inner peace do not come from perfecting a flawless, socially acceptable persona, but from radically accepting and integrating the entirety of your human nature, especially the parts you have been taught to despise. Wholeness is infinitely more powerful than goodness. Practical application: in your daily life, stop running from your negative emotional triggers. When you feel a sudden surge of disproportionate anger, intense jealousy toward a peer's success, or visceral judgment toward a stranger. Treat it as a psychological compass rather than a character flaw. Pause, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what repressed part of me is this situation reflecting? Instead of immediately shaming yourself for these ugly feelings, sit with them. Journal about your secret resentments or unvoiced needs without filtering yourself. Start small by expressing a genuine polite no when you usually default to anxious people-pleasing, thereby honoring your shadow's demand for self-advocacy. By reclaiming these micro-moments of messy authenticity, you slowly dismantle your exhausting facade and rebuild a life rooted in genuine wholeness. Question for discussion. What is one specific emotional trigger or negative trait you strongly dislike in others that might actually be a hidden, repressed part of your own shadow? Please politely share your thoughts and perspectives in the comment section below so we can all learn and grow from each other's insights. If you found value in this deep dive into the human psyche, please hit the subscribe button. Your subscription directly supports the channel and gives us the motivation to keep creating more profound, high-quality content for you.